Hello, welcome to our second creative writing workshop. Today we will be covering conflict, and this falls into three areas. Firstly, why conflict is so important in our stories and storytelling. Two, the various types of conflict that we can have in our stories. And finally, choosing the right kind of conflict for your story. Let's begin with the first part, why conflict is so important. First of all, let's recap. What have we learned? In the first workshop, we talked all about character and how characters are the most important thing in our stories, how you should know your characters really, really well. And finally, how your character, especially your main character, should always want something. So where does conflict fit into this then? It has to do with that last point, that your character should always want something. That want will drive them to act, to achieve their goals. Their wants, desires, needs will propel them through the story from beginning to end. But is that enough to make our stories interesting? A character wants something and they chase it. Great. But if they get what they want really easily, is it much of a story? For example, if Harry Potter went to Hogwarts, but Voldemort decided to retire as a villain, just travel around, see the countryside, maybe retire by the sea. So Harry doesn't have to deal with Voldemort in Hogwarts. It'd still be kind of an interesting story. Harry would become a wizard, make some nice friends, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting as a story we get when Voldemort is involved, when he's this opposing force to Harry, and Harry has to constantly do battle with Voldemort and his minions. Imagine the Avengers without Thanos. Imagine a romance story where two characters get together and live happily ever after, but they do so in the first paragraph of the story because nothing was stopping them from getting together. In The Lord of the Rings, if instead of having to go to Mount Doom, Frodo was able to destroy the One Ring by just chucking it down a well in the Shire. Never had to leave the Shire, never had to encounter all the obstacles that he faced. The films would be a lot shorter for a start, that's for sure, but probably not better. They wouldn't be very entertaining. So what is this missing piece of the puzzle that we're talking about? Obviously, that's conflict. Conflict is something that stands in the character's way. Something or someone that opposes them makes getting what they want difficult, makes it a struggle. So while your characters remain the most important part of the story, the conflict is sort of the heart of your story. Without conflict, there would be no story to follow your characters through. So hopefully that gives you a good grasp of why conflict is so important in your story. So let's get more practical. Let's take a look at some examples of what conflicts you can have in your story and how these will work to make your stories more interesting. So when talking about types of conflict, let's go back to Amy. You'll remember in our first video, we created Amy and landed her in a situation where a classmate of hers had gone missing and Amy wanted to help find them. So our main character is Amy. You all created a detailed version of her and you gave her some wants as well. But we figured for our example here that the main want that Amy has is to find her missing classmate. She might want this for different reasons depending on your version of Amy, but let's focus on this main want. So let's look at the different obstacles we can put in Amy's way, which will cause conflict, make life difficult for her, but make for a really interesting story as she tries to find that missing classmate. So what obstacles might she face in finding her missing classmate? This is going to be our first exercise of the workshop. So I want you to pause the video now. Make sure you have your pen and your paper handy, and think up some things that will get in her way, make the search difficult, put her in danger, actively oppose her, anything like that. So come up with 5 different obstacles that Amy might come up with in searching for her missing classmate. Okay, pause here and take 5 minutes to do this. Okay, so I imagine you found that quite easy. Some examples that I came up with. So she wants to investigate, but the guards tell her to keep out, get lost, no place for a kid. So she can't get any information on the investigation. So that's a difficulty. That's some form of an obstacle in her way. Her parents are really worried. There's someone gone missing locally. So they say, Amy, right, when you come home from school, that's it. Stay inside all the time. No going out, no seeing your friends. That makes it difficult. She wants to get out and about, investigate and figure things out. She's locked in her room all the time. As the story goes on, new obstacles might kind of crop up as the story develops. So maybe when she starts to get some information, when she overcomes those initial obstacles and begins to figure things out, then she starts to get mysterious threats saying, stop your investigation, leave well enough alone. And then maybe further on down along the line, when she's investigating, her investigation leads her to a friend of hers, someone that she thought she was a good friend, but now she thinks might have had something to do with the disappearance. And that's really difficult for Amy because she almost wants to stop in case she wants to discover something really terrible about her friend. And another big obstacle is maybe just her fear. She's afraid. She shouldn't be doing this. She'd be better off if she did stay at home and stay safe. So these last two ones are particularly interesting obstacles because they don't come from any outside source. They come from Amy herself. That's the interesting thing about obstacles. They can be anything, large or small, and come from any source at all. Okay? So you might have come up with similar obstacles, maybe totally different obstacles. So the point here is that there's just so many different types of obstacles you can have in any kind of a story, okay? So that's the interesting thing about obstacles. They can be anything, large or small, and they can come from any source, okay? The list of potential obstacles for your story is practically endless, okay? So to help a little bit, let's break it down and look at the different types of obstacles, the different categories that they fit in. So the types of obstacles, the types of conflict that your characters might come up against. Firstly, there's character versus self. This is kind of a core conflict. This is internal conflict, and this comes in various forms. Some examples of which would be fear, lack of self-confidence, a lack of knowledge, shame, a character's temper getting in the way, all of these things that come from the character themselves that might stop them getting what they want in a story. Okay? Second, then, is character versus character. These are interpersonal conflicts, and these are ones that come externally, and they're your main character versus any other character or characters that they might come up against. For example, a bully, teachers, Gardaí, rivals, villains, if your story has villains, parents, maybe even their friends who mean well and want to stop them from doing something. That's still an obstacle. If sports is involved in your story, then the opposing team is a very obvious obstacle for them. And finally, we have a larger layer of obstacles, okay? Characters that come from the broader world. So there's a few different labels for this. Character versus society is one. So this is maybe government, church, army, so things that are bigger than just individual person or groups of people, okay? Things that are a function of a society as a whole. And in this larger group, we also have character versus nature, okay? And this is something that we forget about sometimes. These are things like if there's a storm or if it's raining, then you can't go outside. Maybe it's a serious life-threatening storm. That can be a big conflict, a big obstacle. Wild animals, being in the jungle. So these kind of exterior threats that don't come from people. And while we're at it, we can also look at a couple of other of these sources. And these kind of depend on the type of story you have, because it can be character versus technology, character versus a supernatural, maybe even character versus aliens. So again, depending on the type, the genre of your story that fits into this outer circle can have a lot of different types of obstacles in it. Conflict can seem like a really strong word, but one thing I hope this diagram shows is that it doesn't necessarily mean fighting. It's not necessarily violence or anything like that. Conflict is simply something that you put in front of your character that somehow prevents them or makes it more difficult for them to get what they want. And that can be anything internal, kind of, even if it's intercharacter, interpersonal conflict. It could be with someone that they're simply arguing with, simply that they have a difference of ideology with. It doesn't have to be kind of massive out and out fights all the time. There's lots of different layers of conflicts, and these conflicts can be subtle and nuanced as well, depending on the type of story that you want to tell. So, having said all of that, now the question is, with so many potential obstacles to choose from, how do you select obstacles for your story? Which obstacles are right and are going to work best for your story? This is really important. Obstacles make your story, so you want to choose the right ones. So this is actually where we, again, go back to our first workshop. First workshop is all about character, and again, your obstacles should be tailored to your character, not kind of plucked at random or whatever the first thing that comes into your head. Your obstacles should really challenge your main character. So again, knowing your main character well will help hugely in this. If your character, for example, has a problem with their temper, create an obstacle that will make them lose their temper. And to overcome that obstacle, they'll have to learn how to control their temper. That will be really interesting to read about and really challenging for your character. You want your obstacle to be interesting and challenging. If your character can easily overcome the obstacles, you'll have an obstacle, you'll have conflict, but it won't be very good. It won't be very interesting. There'll be no tension or drama to your story. You want the reader to think when they're reading your story, oh, this obstacle, I don't know how the character is going to overcome this. I want to turn the page and see what happens. So I'm going to give an example of this here. Okay, so another story example, Jenny, her younger sister Sandra, is sneaking out at night. She's fallen in with a really bad crowd. She's using drugs. It's just her, she's really kind of throwing her life down the drain, and Jenny wants to help her. Okay, so we can easily come up with tons of obstacles for this. But if we want to come up with more challenging obstacles, we will need to know more about Jenny. Okay, so if we know Jenny, we know what type of obstacles will challenge her, will be difficult for her to overcome. So here's my Jenny character. Jenny is a good sister. Okay, she does really well at school. She gets really good grades. She's got good friends. She worries about her future. She knows she's going to get into a good college, wants to have a good career. She gets on really well with her parents. Her parents are so proud of her. She's that simple, you know. But Jenny's a good person at heart. She really loves her sister Sandra, and she does want to help her. So obstacles. Knowing that character Jenny, some good challenging obstacles for her, I think. Number one would be parents. Okay, so even though Jenny gets on really well with her parents, in this situation there might be a conflict because her parents think Sandra is up to no good, but her parents take a different view. Her parents are really mad at Sandra. They think she's just going to get into a lot of trouble, and they want to figure out what's going on with her. But Jenny knows that if they find out what Sandra has been up to, they're just going to murder Sandra. They're going to give out to her. They're going to, you know, lock her up. Jenny knows that they'll just end up pushing her away and making the situation worse. Okay, so Jenny has to lie to her parents. She has to say, Mom, Dad, look, Sandra's doing okay. It's not that bad. Don't worry about it. And Jenny hates this. Jenny's such a good person. She's never lied to her parents. So overcoming this obstacle, although it might seem silly for you, it's really difficult for Jenny. Okay, we can make it worse again. Jenny's parents think, right, we know Sandra's up to no good. We're going to search her room and we're going to see if we can find anything. Jenny, knowing what's going to happen, knowing the situation is going to explode if her parents find something in Sandra's room, she takes drugs that she knows are in Sandra's room and she hides them in her own room. Okay, so again, the same obstacle, her parents finding things and exploding and just making things worse. But to prevent this obstacle, Jenny has had to hide drugs in her room. And this is just like, this keeps her awake at night. She's not this person having drugs in her room. All she can think about is how this is going to destroy her whole future, and she's totally freaking out. This is really personal. If in trying to overcome this obstacle, it's tearing Jenny apart, and that would be horrible as it is for poor Jenny. That'd be great to read about. It's so challenging. It's so difficult for Jenny. Another way of having good, interesting obstacles in your story is to have conflicting obstacles. Okay, to have more than one obstacle, but the obstacles conflict with one another. Okay, so for example, Jenny has found the drugs, hidden them in her room, and she wants to get rid of the drugs. Okay, but she knows if she just flushes them down the toilet, then her sister's going to get in a lot of trouble with the people she hangs out with, because, you know, the drugs belong to them. So that's a big obstacle. But if she gives the drugs back to her sister, then her sister is going to stick with this crowd and nothing good will come of it. So there's these two different obstacles that Jenny has, that she can't give the drugs back to her sister and she can't get rid of them. So how is she going to solve these two conflicts at the same time? And in fact, these obstacles sort of conflict, that if she solves one, it'll make the other worse. So this just makes things just difficult and messy. And again, it creates drama and tension and really has the reader thinking, how is Jenny going to get out of this? Another way of having multiple obstacles in your story is to have solving one obstacle create another different obstacle. Say, for example, we take a different character and this character is worried about passing their exam. Okay, they really need to pass this exam, but they haven't done their work and they're totally panicking. So to solve this, to overcome this obstacle, they cheat and they pass the exam with flying colors. But someone saw them cheat and is now blackmailing them. So solving one problem has created another larger problem for them. So the conclusion is life is messy and your story can be as well. You can have tons of different obstacles, but do remember that if you have one obstacle after another, your story will be quite long. Possibly a better way to have multiple obstacles is to kind of stick them together, have conflicting obstacles, having, you know, an obstacle create another. So to sort of recap on what we've learned so far, at the first workshop, we learned you have to get to know your character really, really, really well. You have to know them so well that you begin to know them, to understand them, probably even to like them. And at this workshop, we learned that we take these characters that we like, we got to be really, really, really mean to them. And that's kind of the heart of writing, getting to know your character really well and then being terrible to them. Not because you hate them, but because it'll make your story dramatic. You'll create drama, you'll create tension, you'll do such terrible things and put such awful things in their way that the reader will be thinking, how are they ever going to succeed? How will they get out of this? You know, and to succeed, your character will have to be clever, to learn, to grow, to be a better person, you know, overcome their fears. And when they do, it'll be all the more satisfying for your reader. So to sum up what we've learned so far, there's an old piece of writing advice, which is as follows. In the first part of your story, get your character stuck up a tree. In the second part of your story, throw rocks at them. Okay, let's do some exercises on what we have learned so far, okay? A couple of quick exercises. Our character Jonathan believes in ghosts. He wants to go to the old haunted house down the street, spend the night there, film some ghosts, and he has a proof to show all his friends. So I want you to come up with two different conflicting obstacles for Jonathan. Okay, so it seems that if he overcomes one obstacle, he cannot overcome the other. Okay, so this is a little bit trickier. So take 5 minutes and think about this, having two obstacles that by overcoming one, he can't overcome the other, it seems. So pause the workshop and come back to me. Okay, I hope you got on okay with that. So let's move on to another exercise. So now our character is Jenny. Jenny fancies someone at school and she wants to ask them out. So come up with one obstacle for Jenny to overcome, but when she overcomes this obstacle, it will create two new obstacles which she never saw coming. Okay, pause, take 5 minutes and come back to me. And that's the final exercise for this workshop. But one last thing before we finish up. I want to talk a little bit about stakes. Okay, so by this, I mean, what is at stake in your story? What will happen if your character does not overcome that obstacle? If you do not get what they want? This differs in every story. In big cinematic blockbusters and superhero movies, usually the world will end. You know, millions of people will die. There's big, huge stakes. If the characters can't overcome their obstacles and get what they want, terrible things will happen. But your story doesn't need these big stakes to be engaging and exciting. The stakes can be small: falling in love, passing an exam, making a new friend, filming a ghost. Regardless of the size of your stakes, what is really, really important is how the stakes feel to your main character. Again, it all comes back to your main character. They are who we are following through the story. So if the stakes feel big to them, even if it's something small, like filming a ghost, falling in love, if it feels like a matter of life and death to your main character, then we can relate to that. Then we'll engage with that, we get sucked into that story. And again, it's about relatability and following your main character. So if your main character is totally caught up in this, if it feels like the end of the world to them, that will be good enough for the reader. Okay, so that's what is important. So don't think your stakes need to be huge. Don't think your obstacles need to be huge. As long as things feel really big and important to your main character, that is what matters. So we talked a lot about conflict and obstacles, things that get in your character's way, things that challenge them and are difficult for them to overcome. What we didn't touch on at all is what happens when they do overcome these obstacles, or rather, even how they overcome these obstacles. If we do our job right and put obstacles in front of our characters that are really challenging, difficult for them, then in order to overcome these obstacles, they will need to learn something new, to grow as a person, to figure something out, maybe get closer with their friends. So overcoming these obstacles will make them wiser, kinder, a better person, maybe even just happier. This change in the character is your character arc. And this is really important in your story. Again, we love to see characters learn and grow. It makes us feel that we can do the same. If the character is relatable, if we've done a good job, the audience is right there alongside them thinking, I want that for myself, I can do that as well. This learning and change is very closely tied to theme. Usually what our characters learn in overcoming their obstacles is a big part of the theme of our story. But that's for our next workshop, where we'll be covering theme. So for now, here is our assignment to do in between workshops. 3 parts to this assignment. First of all, come up with a new character. We'll call them Aaron. Use a list from the last workshop and get to know the character well. I'll pop that list up on screen in a second. The second part is Aaron has fallen out with their best friend. They are really upset about this and they want to make things up. Now I need you to imagine 2 conflicting obstacles in their way. When they overcome these obstacles, imagine it causes another obstacle for them. So now not only do you have to imagine the conflicting obstacles, but I actually want you to imagine a way of overcoming them. And then that creates another obstacle. And finally, I want you to write this story. Again, short story, less than 1,000 words, and it can be any kind of a story you like. Romance, fantasy, sci-fi, action, drama, anything at all, as long as you start with these 2 characters and make them the focus of your story. All right, here is a list. So again, you can pause the workshop here, have a look at this list, take it down. Okay, that's it. Thanks for sticking with me for the workshop. And I really do hope that you tackle the assignment, and I hope you enjoy tackling it. You should enjoy your writing. If you want to be a writer, it's absolutely something that you should enjoy. So I hope these tools that we're talking about help you get the best of your writing, help you feel that your writing is improving, and help you to enjoy it more. So that's it for now, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.